From the Oklahoma newsroom, it's time for Thunder Thursday. I'm Jenny Carlson here with part of our Thunder coverage team, columnist Barry Trammell and Thunder beat writer Eric Horn. Guys, we're here on a game day, Thunder in San Antonio tonight for the first of back-to-back, Denver here in Oklahoma City on Friday night. But first, a breaking news bit this morning as we're hearing reports that Maurice Cheeks, the Thunder assistant, is going to be inducted into the Naismith Basketball Hall of Fame. That announcement will come later on. They'd usually do that with the Final Four. Eric, this is a story you actually wrote just the other day about the fact that there are a lot of people that say this guy should have been in already, but now that he is, talk us through the argument for Maurice Cheeks to be in that Basketball Hall of Fame.
Well, he played in one of the golden eras of NBA basketball with the 80s Lakers, Celtics teams. He played on a championship team with the Philadelphia 76ers that had two Hall of Famers on it, Dr. J, Julius Erving, and Moses Malone. Cheeks and his teammate Bobby Jones probably both should be in the Hall of Fame. Cheeks has been out of the game for 25 years now. He's been eligible for the Hall of Fame for 20 years. And frankly, he's one of the best point guards of all time. I talked to legendary Boston sports writer Bob Ryan, who's seen every game of significance from those 80s games where the Celtics were going up against the Philadelphia 76ers, and he calls Maurice Cheeks the perfect point guard. And Bob Ryan has seen all kinds of guys come through the Boston Garden. He's seen Mo Cheeks play in his prime. Mo Cheeks has one of the highest shooting percentages for guys who played in the playoffs, particularly from a guard. I don't think there's anybody of his height that shot better than him in the playoffs. He always elevated his game in the postseason, and he's a guy that's probably been long deserved considering all the guys he played against and competed against. And basically the best Philly teams of all time outside of when Wilt Chamberlain was playing there, Mo Cheeks was at the head of those teams.
Why'd you get overlooked, guys? Why do you think Mo Cheeks and all the accomplishments Eric just talked about, Barry, why'd you get overlooked?
Well, he wasn't a mega superstar. So guys like that sort of have to, if they're not first ballot guys, you sort of have to wait your turn. And what's happened to Mo in the last 10, 15 years is we've had a development of the point guard position. You look at point guards today, they're expected to be superstars. They're expected to be scorers. Russell Westbrook, Steph Curry, all those kinds of guys. John Wall, just Kyrie Irving. Point guards are expected to fill the ball up. Back in the old days, that wasn't the case. You look at Magic Johnson in '82-'83, which I think is the year that Philly won the title. Magic Johnson, superstar, averaged 16.8 points a game, which by today's standard, not that many points. But nobody's saying, why isn't Magic scoring more? In fact, they said, look at Magic. Look at all the points he's scoring. And Boston, they had the big three front court. They didn't have scoring point guard. In retrospect, you look at Mo's lack of scoring and you think, he wasn't that big of a scorer. Wasn't an issue in his day, so history has not been kind to that kind of point guard position. So that's part of it. You got guys like Bob Ryan, which Eric quoted in his story, who keep this kind of thing alive and say, hey, this guy was incredible, a great quarterback. It's similar to the NFL. If you look at the statistics of the quarterbacks in the 70s in the NFL, their yards, their touchdown passes, they pale in comparison to today when guys are throwing for 4,000 yards or 5,000 yards a season and throwing 40 touchdown passes. Bob Greasy'd win a Super Bowl throwing 14 passes a game. It's not because he wasn't a great quarterback. The game was different. Mo Cheeks was an outstanding point guard. Congrats to him.
Yeah, go ahead, Eric.
You even saw it, for a guy who played for the Boston Celtics and Dennis Johnson. It took him a long time, and unfortunately, he got into the Hall of Fame posthumously. I said that word poorly. But, Dennis Johnson was a guy similar to the Mo Cheeks mold, played with a ton of front court talent that ended up making the Hall of Fame. Kevin McHale, Larry Bird, Robert Parrish.
The other guy.
But it took Dennis Johnson some time, even though he was a multiple-time NBA champion, even though he was a champion before he even got to the Boston Celtics. Just a great elite defensive player, similar to the Mo Cheeks mold, just being able to lock down at that point guard position or that off guard position. It even took him some time to get into the Hall of Fame. So like Barry said, the guards of the 80s, until you get to the Michael Jordan or the Isaiah Thomases or even Magic Johnson, they were kind of peripheral figures to these larger-than-life front court guys, and it just took some time for these guys to get their just due.
It's interesting, too, that there's also a report out of some other guys that are going to get in, including a modern-day point guard in Jason Kidd. So it's sort of an interesting juxtaposition, Barry, as you talk about the point guard evolution. I mean, a guy like Jason Kidd would have been one of those guys that started to turn that corner towards these point guards that need to score, need to be stars. And you see him being inducted the same year as Mo Cheeks. It's an interesting match that those two guys would go in the same year.
Yeah, and you know, Jason Kidd's the kind of guy who, so he was another sort of transformative point guard, and that he became he's not a triple-double machine. We got one of those a block from here.
Right.
He showed what a triple-double machine, but Jason Kidd could rebound, and he was big, and he could do all kinds of things. But in a lot of ways, Jason was sort of the last of the pass-first point guards. He always tried to pass first. Point guards today not expected to pass first. If Mo Cheeks had tried to score, if Dennis Johnson had tried to score, they would have been on the bench really quick, because that's not what you do in 1983.
Yeah.
You did not look to score. You looked to throw it to Moses Malone, to Julius Erving, to Andrew Toney, to Bobby Jones. That was your job.
Go ahead, Eric.
But one of the biggest things about Mo Cheeks that Bob Ryan emphasized to me, Billy Cunningham, his former coach with the Philadelphia 76ers, emphasized to me, 9 straight years this guy upped his scoring average in the postseason, and he shot over 50%. I mean, you're not going to get much more from a point guard. This was a guy who knew when he needed to score and when he needed to up his game. He did it for almost a decade. And, I mean, there's not a lot of guys that you can say that about in the league, whether they're Hall of Famers or role players, that can up their scoring and also shoot it at a high percentage. He wasn't just shooting layups either. This is a guy who was taking the mid-range shot, and he was doing it with proficiency. Isn't
it interesting, too, that today we talk about a guy like Chris Paul as being a true quote-unquote point guard? I mean, he, like you're talking about, Barry, if Maurice Cheeks or the point guards of that era were to think about shooting as much as Chris Paul does, it'd have been heresy back in the day, but now we think, oh, what a novel concept, a guy that passes first and doesn't shoot very much.
And this whole idea of a true point guard, it's only, I mean, Russell Westbrook was a superstar, and he was still getting criticism that he wasn't a true point guard. Mm-hmm. And people like Chris Paul were held up as the ideal, and Chris Paul's a fabulous point guard. But it's been a phenomenon that's been in reality for several years, but it's not been widely accepted until just recently that this is the way the game. So people look back fondly on the true point guard. They just haven't always rewarded them in terms of honors like the Hall of Fame.
All right, and it sounds like we'll probably know more officially, Eric, probably in the next couple of days when the announcement is made, but at this rate, it sounds like we may know the whole class before they even make an announcement.
Yeah, it's been leaking out all week. Formal announcement Saturday at the Final Four in San Antonio. Also included in that class is going to be Grant Hill, great versatile player who had his career kind of ended short by injury.
All right.
Well, not really ended short, I'm sorry, but he had his star track derailed by injury.
He played forever.
Yeah, he just didn't reach the heights that
it looked like he was headed towards.
For him because of the injuries, but Grant Hill, great player.
Yeah, and it looks like there's going to be several players in this class, which frankly the number of not players that have been in the Hall of Fame, it's been kind of disturbing, frankly.
And back to your original point about what took Mo Cheeks so long, I love Grant Hill. The idea that Grant Hill has had a better basketball career than Mo Cheeks is absurd.
Yeah.
He's been a bigger star. He had a bigger name, came out of Duke. He went to Duke. Mo Cheeks played down in Canyon at West Texas State at the time. But the idea that Grant Hill was a better NBA basketball player than Maurice Cheeks is silly. He was not, but because of star power, he had to wait a lot longer.
And frankly, if we factor in the whole of the Naismith Basketball Hall of Fame, not just your playing contributions, but Mo Cheeks has also been a successful NBA coach as well. So if you factor in that, I think he can go more than just Mo Cheeks' basketball career. He can go to his coaching career as well. He's been a long-time Thunder assistant, coached in Portland, coached in Philly, and he's had success there. So I think that should go into his credentials as well.
All right, guys, let's talk about the guys that are still wearing the short pants on the court, playing the game.
Not that short, but I get your meaning.
Right. Okay, that are still playing. How about that?
In fact, I still have never seen Russell Westbrook's legs. He has them all covered up.
I assume they're there, though. Okay, guys, the Thunder, I mentioned San Antonio Thursday night. Home game against Denver on Friday night. Then Sunday, another game at home. Guys, this is a big stretch. Eric, your sidekick, Brett Dawson, had a story on this today. just the magnitude of this, how big these games are. Put it in context for us, how big these games are for this team.
They're monsters, particularly tonight against San Antonio. You know, this is a tiebreaker game. If they win this game, they have the outright tiebreaker against San Antonio. If they finish with the same record, the Thunder will be ahead of them in the standings. That's massive. San Antonio's been playing well. You know, they might not have LaMarcus Aldridge tonight. He's got a bruised knee. If he doesn't play and the Thunder wins, that's a huge advantage in the standings. That could be, you know, that could be home court advantage in the playoffs if the Thunder holds on to the 4th seed. You know, the New Orleans game, also a big one. Now, they don't have the tiebreaker over New Orleans, but they have to stay ahead of them in the win column. It's very important. You know, Anthony Davis is a monster. The Thunder always has problems stopping him. And, you know, the Thunder's been pretty solid on the road since the All-Star break and actually at the turn of the year. So you'd expect the Thunder to go on the road and play well. It's just a matter of whether or not they can win. You know, last time we saw them on the road, not a great finish in Boston.
Yeah, and Barry, you wrote, dove a little deeper into this first game of these three, this game at San Antonio, how Oklahoma City, because of Sam Presti's links to the Spurs over the years, has really tried to model Oklahoma City after San Antonio. And there are definitely similarities. I mean, there's zero doubt that there are fingerprints of the Spurs. But the longer the Thunder's been in existence, you start to see that this isn't a mirror image of one franchise and another.
That's right. Sam Presti's molded his own franchise. And, you know, in the early days, we thought, well, it's the San Antonio way. The truth is, Clay Bennett modeled the entire franchise, not just the basketball side. He modeled everything after San Antonio. He'd been in the board of directors with the Spurs, got his own franchise here with the Thunder, and loved the San Antonio model. Hired a San Antonio guy, Sam Presti, only 30 years old, to take over and build this franchise. But Presti has diverted in a lot of different ways from the Spurs. The one that jumped out at me in the last couple of days is, you know, the Spurs had a very poor game at Washington on Tuesday night, I think it was. And not very nice words from Greg Popovich about his team, saying these guys ought to be embarrassed. Lack of effort, lack of focus, just, you know, didn't get back on defense. You would never hear Billy Donovan or before him Scott Brooks talk like that. Yeah. You would never hear, you know, Manu Ginobili talking about tonight's Thunder game, saying this is a big, big game. Thunder doesn't talk like this. All the games are the same. Everything's, you know, everything's fine. So there's a different mindset. I'm not saying one's bad or one's good. I'm not saying one's better or one's worse. It's just different. The Thunder and the Spurs don't do everything exactly alike, and you see some of these things come out the further we get from the birth of this franchise.
You know, Eric, one of the things that we've talked about is the fact that these two teams, you know, meeting tonight in San Antonio on Thursday night could also be playoff opponents. And we've been talking about the Spurs are on the slide, the Spurs are on the downhill, the Spurs are dead, if you want to even throw out something worse. Seems like for years, and yet here they are, right in the hunt for home court. I mean, let's not kid ourselves. Thunder right now in the 4 spot in the West, 17 games behind Houston, and then New Orleans, San Antonio, both at 18. So, you know, really still close for that 4, 5, 6 spot. I mean, these guys, they're not going away. I mean, they lost their star in Kawhi Leonard to injury, and now all this kerfuffle about will he, won't he, and yet here they sit, still a team I'm not sure anybody wants to see in the playoffs, even though the Thunder might say they would want to see them in the playoffs.
I think the Thunder would love to see them in the playoffs. But that being said, you know, kudos to San Antonio. They do this every year. We've been trying to kill them off for 15 years, and they're just a remarkable franchise. They're resilient. And, you know, the Thunder would, and many teams around the league, whether it's Denver, the Lakers, the Thunder, would be wise to take cues from San Antonio and how they persevere when guys go down. And credit to the Thunder, you know, after losing Andre Robertson, they've actually improved their winning percentage since losing Andre Robertson. They haven't been a bad team. They just had to take a little time to adjust. They had a little losing streak, but they've gotten back on track for the most part. But San Antonio, again, I mean, without having Kawhi Leonard this year, only having him for 9 games, you know, Manu Ginobili said it, I think, last week or a couple weeks ago, you know, we can't sit here and expect him to be back. We have to play as if this guy's not going to be back. And that's the way you got to be in the NBA. I mean, guys go down all the time. Every team that's vying for a playoff spot right now has had some kind of significant injury or guys out for a significant period of time. Golden State's banged up. You know, Boston lost Gordon Hayward the first game of the year, and they're going on the road and just beating teams on game winners and just gritting out tough wins against teams like Portland and Utah. So, it's one of those things where you lose guys throughout the course of the season. You can't be deterred by it. It's a next man up cliche mentality, and the Spurs have shown it better than anybody else, particularly this year with Kawhi being out and still being in position to get a home court playoff spot.
Definitely. All right, we talked San Antonio Thursday, Denver Friday, New Orleans on Sunday, a team that I think we can all agree would be difficult for the Thunder if that's their playoff matchup. Barry, is it must win for all three of these games in your mind?
Not necessarily. The Thunder's actually the best things that are happening to the Thunder is on the days when they don't play, because a lot of these teams are losing.
Yeah.
If the Thunder beats San Antonio and New Orleans, they're going to finish fourth. I don't have any doubts about that. If you lose to one of them, then that team, whoever you lose to, has got a decent chance to pass you for fourth. If you lose to both of them, you might end up below fifth. So that's really where it comes down to. I think the Thunder's in good shape. This is a team that is actually playing better in some ways against the good teams than the bad teams. So I think the Thunder will be representative. We bemoaned that loss at Boston the other day when they just messed it up at the end, missing foul shots. But as Eric said, this Boston team is fighting and winning all kinds of plays. Turns out that actually was a pretty good performance. If you make foul shots, you win in Boston. Today, or the game before, they won in Portland. So this is a team that seems to act. It acts like it can answer the bell against the really good teams, against the big challenges. We sort of agree with that. They've lost, some rum-dums. So I think they're going to play well. If they do, they're going to be okay. I still think the odds are, the Thunder's going to finish fourth. But these two games are huge in that endeavor.
Eric, are you buying what Barry's selling?
Well, I mean, the Thunder certainly is. They're buying their own goods. Carmelo Anthony yesterday saying, we'll be there, we'll be in the playoffs. I don't have any doubt that the Thunder will be in the playoffs, but Carmelo Anthony also said that, when the playoffs start, people are going to forget about the regular season. You know what? Prove it. Go play well these next 2 weeks. Not necessarily winning every game, but playing well and being consistent and looking like a team that's ready to go into the playoffs. We thought that was the case when they went to Toronto and played hard and played well. They looked like they were in playoff mode. Then they get to Boston, stumble a little bit, miss a bunch of free throws. Portland comes here, they get battered on the offensive glass. So, be consistent and play well these next 3 games. Don't overlook the game against Denver at home. It's a back-to-back on Friday, the second game of a back-to-back, but Denver's a terrible road team. They're going to be in the last game of a 7-game road trip. Smoke them at home and make a statement.
You mentioned Carmelo Anthony's comment about the regular season being forgotten, and I think to some degree that is right. I do think people will forget losing streaks, winning streaks, whatever you want to throw out there. But I go back to something I've written and we've talked about, and you guys have written too, habits, Barry. I mean, the whole idea that is this team in a position, are they really going to be able to just decide when the playoffs start that they're gonna play with these great habits? Eric mentioned, struggles at Boston, struggles against Portland. Are we starting to come around to saying, okay, this is a team that could do that? Whether it will or not remains to be seen, or is it unlikely at this point?
Oh, it's completely unlikely. There's really not a switch that you turn on. The truth is, though, that in August, in September, when they added Carmelo early in the season, they said it and we said it, and we still agree. I think this is a team that's really built for the playoffs. This is a team that, more than the regular season, this is a team that should excel in the playoffs. They've got 3 guys that can generate their own shot at a high level, when Westbrook, George, and Carmelo, and frankly off the bench, Raymond Felton can do that too. That's valuable in the playoffs, where defense is really batting down and the offense becomes more of a slog game. And sometimes you just have to put the ball in somebody's hand and hope they can get a good shot. The Thunder should be ahead of the curve in that regard. Now, one of the other advantages for this team as a playoff-built team was Andre Robertson and the defensive flexibility he gave. That was hurt when Robertson went out. Corey Brewer has stepped into that void somewhat. He's not Andre Robertson caliber, but he helps a lot in that regard. So the truth is, no, they're not going to get rid of their bad habits. They're not going to flip a switch, but they still are built for the playoffs, and that is going to help them.
As important as these 3 games coming up are, they're so important that we've almost, I know I have, lost sight of the fact that next Tuesday, the Warriors are in town. I mean, Eric, the big games continue. You wrote about this, Brett wrote about this, I think we've all talked about it, this finishing stretch. Warriors next week, Rockets next week. The Thunder can't afford, though, to even think about that. As big as those games are, and I know that those two teams have had injury issues, but still, these next three are so big in terms of tiebreakers and seeding, you almost can't even think about the fact that those two teams are coming up.
No, they shouldn't be either because, frankly, you don't know what kind of Warriors team you're going to get coming in here next week anyway. You might get some just hodgepodge of Warriors players because, Steph's back on the on the pine, and then, Klay Thompson's still not back. Kevin Durant should be back tonight, I think. But you don't know what kind of Warriors team is going to come in, and then you don't know what you're going to get from Houston. While it is a national TV game and those guys should be available, teams have ways of making up excuses to sit players and in terms of little niggling injuries or whatever. So you don't know what kind of teams you're going to get in there. The Thunder can't afford to look ahead. They got to take care of the games that are in front of them right now. And, it shouldn't be a thing of they're chasing the two teams that are coming in next week because those teams are far ahead of them. So they got to play well against San Antonio. They got to play well against Denver, and they've got to play well at New Orleans to ensure themselves that they have a little bit of a cushion going into the Golden State and Houston games. All
right, guys, lots of basketball left, lots of important basketball left. 7 o'clock games, all those 4 games we talked about except for that 5 o'clock at New Orleans on Sunday. The first two, or I'm sorry, the bookends, San Antonio and then the Warriors on TNT, the other two on Fox Sports Oklahoma. So be sure to stay with the best coverage team anywhere at newsok.com every day in the Oklahoman.